A light breeze swept through the fields, and the sound of roosters echoed in the distance. On Sarah's small farm, it seemed like just another peaceful day. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables alongside her father, Kelvin, as they discussed the week's work. Outside, Henry, Sarah's 8-year-old son, was tending to the chickens. The golden-hued sunset created a serene landscape, but something unusual was about to happen. While collecting eggs, Henry noticed a man standing near the chicken coop. The stranger looked out of place, almost as if he had stepped out of a history book. His clothes were worn, an aged linen shirt and leather pants muddied by dirt. His hair and beard were wild and untamed, giving the impression of months without grooming. The boy froze for a moment before running back to the house, his boots kicking up dust as he bolted. "Mom! Mom!" he shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "There's a weird man outside. He looks lost. Or maybe he's a thief." Sarah immediately stopped what she was doing, grabbed the old shotgun leaning by the door, and stepped outside briskly. Kelvin followed, frowning but silent. When they reached the field, the stranger was still there, looking around as if everything he saw was entirely foreign to him. "Who are you? And what are you doing on my property?" Sarah shouted, keeping the gun trained on him. The man slowly raised his hands, his wide eyes clearly showing fear. He stammered as he tried to respond, his voice rough and low. I thought this was my home." His gaze was filled with genuine confusion, and Sarah noticed that he looked more lost than threatening. She stepped closer and switched on the floodlight near the chicken coop, casting a sudden brightness over the man. He immediately recoiled, shielding his eyes with his hands and shouting, "What kind of sorcery is this? Are you a witch?" Sarah's surprise was evident, but she remained calm, carefully observing the stranger, who seemed to have no concept of electricity. "A witch? Are you serious?" she replied, still maintaining her firm tone. Kelvin, sensing the man's confusion, suggested they bring him inside. The stranger appeared exhausted and disoriented, with a gash on his forehead that was crusted with dried blood. Sarah hesitated, but eventually lowered her weapon. "Come, let's take care of that wound." He resisted briefly but ultimately agreed. Inside the house, under the kitchen's warm light, the man seemed even more out of place. He looked around as if each object were a mystical relic. As Sarah cleaned the cut with a damp cloth, he murmured haltingly, "My name is Bill." Kelvin, always suspicious, crossed his arms and stared at the man. "And where exactly are you from, Bill?" The silence that followed was long. Bill seemed to struggle to remember, shaking his head in frustration. Sarah observing Bill while Kelvin mutters under his breath, "Something's not right about this man. He doesn't belong here." Bill's tired face as he stares at the light bulb, whispering to himself, "The year, is it not 1787? The silence filled the room as Bill's gaze remained fixed on the lamp above him, as though he were trying to decipher an impossible riddle. Sarah exchanged a glance with Kelvin, who looked increasingly distrustful. However, Sarah felt something different, a mixture of curiosity and concern. Bill didn't seem dangerous, just lost. "So, Bill," Sarah began, trying to sound calmer, "if you're not from here, where are you from? And how did you end up in the middle of our farm?" Bill hesitated before answering. "I don't know how to explain all of this. These lights, these clothes, these things." He gestured toward the microwave, as though it were a magical object. "None of this existed in my time. The last place I remember was a cave in the forest." Kelvin narrowed his eyes. "A cave? What kind of crazy story is this? Are you trying to fool us?" Sarah raised a hand, signaling for patience. "Wait, Dad, let's give him some time. That cut on his head might be making things worse." But Bill seemed more certain of his words now. "It's not confusion. Before waking up here, the year was 1787. His voice was firm, almost defiant, yet his expression revealed a man terrified by his own statement. The next morning, Sarah decided to call Teddy, a longtime friend and the town's police officer. When she phoned him, her voice was serious. "Teddy, you need to come over. There's a strange man at the farm and, well, I think you need to see him for yourself." Soon the sound of an engine broke the farm's tranquility. Teddy arrived in his patrol car, a vehicle that immediately captured Bill's attention. He stepped onto the yard and, upon seeing the car, his eyes widened in shock. "What kind of carriage is this? How does it move without horses?" His voice was incredulous, and he took a few steps back. Teddy got out of the car, glancing at Bill, who looked even more out of place in daylight. "Is this the man?" he asked Sarah. She nodded. "He says his name is Bill, and that he's from 1787. Teddy laughed, shaking his head. "Sarah, are you serious? This sounds like something out of a drunk's tale." But the look on Sarah's face made him reconsider. "All right, let's see who he really is." He walked over to Bill and firmly asked them to bring him to the station for fingerprinting. At the station, Bill looked around in a mixture of fascination and terror. The machines, computers, and even the telephone on Teddy's desk seemed like artifacts from another world to him. When Teddy guided him to the fingerprinting equipment, Bill hesitated. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked nervously. "We're just going to check who you really are, Bill. It won't hurt," Teddy assured him. However, when the data was entered into the system, something unexpected happened. No record was found. Nothing, not even a remote mention of Bill's name. "This doesn't make sense," Teddy muttered, staring at the computer screen. He tried again, but the result was the same. Sarah, who had been observing closely, crossed her arms. "Now what?" "What does that mean?" "It means this man doesn't exist, not officially anyway," Teddy replied, clearly baffled. He sighed before suggesting they take him to the hospital for a medical evaluation. If he suffered any trauma, that might explain all this confusion. At the hospital, Bill underwent a series of tests while Sarah and Teddy waited anxiously for the results. Finally, the doctor appeared, bringing unexpected news. Physically, he's perfectly healthy. There are no signs of trauma or any condition that could explain memory loss. Bill, who had remained silent until then, finally stood, visibly uncomfortable with the environment. The bright lights and machines around him seemed to unsettle him. "I don't belong here," he said firmly. "Please, take me back to the farm." That night, as rain began to fall outside, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, gazing out the window. Bill was back on the sofa, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. "You don't need to be afraid," she said softly. "Whatever happened, we'll figure it out together." Bill turned to her, his expression somber. "I know one thing. I was never meant to leave that cave." The rain continued to patter against the roof, the sound filling the otherwise quiet farm. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped around a warm cup of tea, watching Bill as he stared at the window. He was still, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the unknown. Kelvin entered the room with a lantern and some tools, placing them on the counter with a thud. "I don't trust him, Sarah," Kelvin said, his voice low but firm. "That man showed up out of nowhere, talking nonsense. And what if he's dangerous? You have a son to think about." Sarah sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Dad, I understand your concern, but something tells me he's not lying. He's scared, lost. And if what he says is true..." Her voice trailed off as she glanced at Bill. Kelvin grunted, shaking his head. "You're putting too much faith in a stranger." With that, he left the room. Later that night, while the others were asleep, Bill quietly slipped out the front door. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, and the moonlight faintly illuminated the path to the barn. He walked slowly, his boots squelching in the damp earth. Inside the barn, the tools and equipment were neatly arranged, but it wasn't the tools that caught his attention. A small square window offered a view of the fields stretching out under the dim glow of the moon. Bill stopped in front of it, staring out at the endless darkness. His thoughts swirled with fragmented memories, the echoes of a life he no longer recognized. "This can't be real," he murmured to himself. But how can it not be? The next morning, Sarah found Bill sitting at the same window in the barn, his eyes red and tired. She approached him cautiously, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "You went out last night, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Bill nodded slowly. "I needed to think. Everything here, it's too much. This world, your lights, your machines. I feel like I've been ripped from my own time." "If you really came from 1787, Sarah said, sitting beside him, "then you need to help me understand how you got here. You mentioned a cave. What happened there?" Bill closed his eyes, as if summoning the courage to recall the events. "I was running from soldiers," he began. "There was a war. I climbed the mountain and found a cave to shelter from the storm. Inside, there was a strange silence, almost as if time itself had stopped. I sat near a pool of water that shimmered like a living mirror. He paused, his eyes distant. The last thing I remember is a deafening clap of thunder. When I stepped out of the cave, everything had changed. The trees, the sky, even the air smelled different. That's when I saw your fields. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowing as she tried to reconcile his story with logic. Do you think that cave somehow transported you through time? She asked cautiously. I don't know what to think, Bill replied, his voice tinged with despair, but something about that cave wasn't natural. Determined to get answers, Sarah decided to call someone who might help. She contacted Dr. Edwin Carter, a local university professor known for his unconventional theories on time and space. At first, Dr. Carter was skeptical, but the mention of a potential anomaly intrigued him enough to visit the farm. When Dr. Carter arrived, he brought along portable instruments to measure magnetic fields and other environmental factors. After hearing Bill's story, he began asking precise questions, trying to piece together the details. The cave you described and the thunder you heard. It could indicate some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon, Carter explained as he adjusted his equipment. There are rare places where certain mineral compositions can create strange effects, especially during storms. Bill, who had been silent, finally spoke up. Does that mean I could go back? Carter looked at him thoughtfully. Theoretically, if the cave is indeed a temporal distortion point, it's possible to return. But it's risky. Time is unpredictable. That night, the group gathered around the kitchen table, poring over maps and discussing the next steps. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Henry, lying in his room nearby, listened intently, even though the adults had tried to keep him out of the conversation. Finally, Sarah made a decision. We need to find that cave. If there's a chance to understand what happened to you, Bill, we have to take it. The next morning dawned gray with thick clouds overhead, signaling an imminent storm. Sarah, Kelvin, Bill, and Dr. Carter gathered in the living room, maps and flashlights spread across the table. Henry, insistent on being involved, sat quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. This is the area you described, Carter said, pointing to a spot on the map. If the cave exists, it should be here, on the northern slope of the mountain. But if the storm worsens, it could be dangerous. Sarah looked at Bill, who seemed resolute. Do you think you can lead us there? She asked. Yes, he replied firmly. I would recognize that place anywhere. It's the only thing that still makes sense. Kelvin shook his head in frustration. This is madness, Sarah. Risking our lives for some story we don't even know is real? And what if we're just following a man who's lost his mind? Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her father's shoulder. If there's even a chance of finding answers, we can't ignore it. The group set off just before noon, with Bill leading the way. The dense forest seemed to close in around them as they advanced, the branches of the trees forming a natural tunnel. The rain began to fall lightly, creating a haunting rhythm as it dripped from the leaves. Carter walked closely behind Bill, monitoring the environment with his devices. There's something here, he said, adjusting the dials. The magnetic field in this area is fluctuating. That's not normal. Suddenly, Bill stopped. He raised his hand, signaling for silence. Ahead of them, a dark rock formation loomed, covered in moss and tree roots. It's here, he said, pointing to a narrow opening between the stones. This is the cave! Inside, the cave was cold, and the air felt heavy, with an almost tangible energy. Carter switched on a flashlight, illuminating wet, gleaming walls that seemed polished by unseen forces. Bill moved slowly, his gaze fixed on the ground. This is where I hid, he murmured. And that pool, that's where it started. The flashlight's beam revealed a shallow pool of crystal-clear water that reflected the cave ceiling like a mirror. Carter knelt beside it, his instruments emitting sharp beeping sounds. This is extraordinary, he said in awe. The mineral composition here, combined with what appears to be a highly unstable magnetic field, it's possible this is a natural anomaly that distorts time. Sarah knelt beside him, peering into the reflective pool. If this pool is the key, how does it work? Likely, it's only activated under specific conditions, Carter replied. A storm or an electrical discharge. At that moment, a clap of thunder rumbled outside, shaking the cave. The pool began to glow faintly, a soft blue light emanating from its depths. Bill took a step back, his eyes wide. This is exactly how it happened before. The storm. It was the trigger. Tension rose as the group debated what to do next. If it's possible to go back through this, are you going to try? Sarah asked Bill, her voice steady. Bill hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. I don't know. Part of me wants answers, to see if there's anything left for me in the past. But now, there's something here, in this time, that I don't want to lose. Sarah understood the weight of his words, but before she could respond, Carter interrupted. We need to decide quickly. The storm's intensity is increasing, and these conditions won't last long. Suddenly, Henry, who had secretly followed them, appeared at the cave's entrance. You can't leave me behind, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. Sarah rushed to him, gripping his shoulders. Henry, I told you to stay home. This is too dangerous. But what if he leaves? Henry cried, looking at Bill. What if I never see him again? Bill knelt down, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. No matter what happens, Henry, you have to be strong. Always. A flash of lightning illuminated the cave, and another thunderclap roared. The pool began bubbling, its glow intensifying. Carter glanced at his instruments, alarmed. It's happening! Whatever this is, it's activating. Bill turned to Sarah, and the two shared a silent moment, heavy with unspoken emotions. He stepped toward the pool but hesitated, his feet caught between the past and the present. The glowing blue light of the pool pulsed like a living heartbeat, casting ghostly reflections on the cave walls. The thunder outside grew louder, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Bill stood frozen at the edge of the pool, staring at the shimmering surface as though it held the answer to every question he'd ever had. Bill, make up your mind, Carter shouted, his voice echoing in the cavern. If you don't go now, you might lose your chance forever. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling, but resolute. And what if he doesn't want to go? Everyone turned to her. Maybe Bill doesn't need to return to the past. Maybe what he was looking for has been here all along. Bill looked at Sarah, his eyes reflecting the pool's blue glow. He knew what she meant. From the moment he'd awakened in this strange world, Sarah and her family had given him something he'd never had before, a place where he belonged. I feel like I have to go, Bill said at last, his voice shaky. If this cave really is a doorway, then there's a reason it exists. I need to know the truth. But that doesn't mean I want to leave you. Suddenly, Henry ran to Bill, grabbing his hand. You can't go, the boy cried, tears streaming down his face. I need you here. You taught me to be strong, to believe in myself. Please don't leave. Henry's words weighed heavily on Bill's heart, but before he could respond, another lightning bolt illuminated the cave, and the pool began to bubble more violently. The light grew brighter, almost blinding. It's now or never, Carter shouted, stepping back. Bill took a deep breath and stepped toward the pool, but something stopped him. He turned to Sarah, who stood frozen, staring at him with tears in her eyes. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted. You've given me more than I ever thought I could find. Sarah stepped closer, taking his hand. If you have to go, go. But know that no matter where you are, you'll never be alone. Bill squeezed her hand tightly and, in a sudden impulse, pulled her into an embrace. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. He stepped away slowly, gave Henry one last look, and took another step, plunging into the pool's glowing light. A deafening thunderclap echoed through the cave, and in an instant, he was gone. When the light faded, the cave fell silent. Sarah dropped to her knees, feeling the emptiness left by Bill's absence. Henry sobbed quietly beside her, and Kelvin placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. Carter stared at his instruments, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. He's gone, but we don't know where. He could be back in the past, or somewhere else entirely. Months passed. Life on the farm slowly returned to normal, but the void left by Bill was felt in every corner. Henry spent more time in the fields, caring for the animals and helping Sarah, showing the strength Bill had taught him. One day, while cleaning the barn, Henry stumbled upon something unusual. Hidden in an old toolbox was a small leather notebook. He ran to show it to Sarah, who carefully opened it. The pages were filled with Bill's familiar handwriting. He had written about everything: his life in the past, his journey through the cave, and the people he had met in the future. On the final page, there was a message. Sarah, Henry, Kelvin, you were the future I never knew I needed. If I managed to return, it was because of you. Thank you for giving me a home, even if only for a little while. You'll be with me forever. In the end, we see Sarah, Henry, and Kelvin working together in the fields under a clear, sunny sky. Though Bill was no longer physically present, his impact on their lives was undeniable. Henry looked up at the sky and smiled, as though sensing that Bill was watching. A distant thunderclap echoed in the background, and Sarah lifted her gaze to the horizon, a small smile forming on her lips. She whispered to herself, "Wherever you are, I hope you found what you were looking for." In the background, we see the fields and the mountain beyond, with the cave hidden among the trees, still holding its secrets for those brave enough to discover them. Bill's story shows us that time is more than minutes and hours. It's about the people we meet, the bonds we create, and the marks we leave on each other. Thank you for watching, and if you believe there are more mysteries of time to uncover, click on the next video to continue the journey.